I'm gonna cut down right into the coupling right there at the key so I don't touch the shaft. And once I get close enough, hopefully hit it with a cold chisel, it'll open this thing up and we'll be able to slide it off of the shaft. So why am I doing this? Oh. Hi, I'm Joe, and welcome to MotorCity Boat Werks. Let's get to work. For the past several months, I've been working on planning and working through the various issues related to putting in the electrical system in the pocket trawler. Now I'm going to set that aside. There's a couple things I need to start thinking about insofar as putting in the new diesel engine into the boat. In a previous episode, I talked about my choice of a Beta Marine 43 diesel engine. That'll be what I use to repower the Ep125. Repowering is a term that I use to refer to any work that has to go on the engine and the engine room of any boat that I'm working on. The salty dogs will tell you that in order to repower a boat, well, you have to actually replace the engine or put in a new engine. But I don't really think that's applicable. If you think about it, any time that you pull out an engine, maybe to rebuild it or to swap it out with something else, or even to update the systems and components that are inside your engine compartment, as long as you're taking that engine out and you're putting something else back in, well, you're probably doing some sort of a repower. You might be refitting or rebuilding or restoring what's already there, or in my case, putting in something completely new with all new systems. This is what we call a repowering. This episode is going to be all about the first steps in beginning that repower process. What comes first? How do you even get a project like this started? One of the first steps in any repower is figuring out, well, what's going to fit inside the engine room? How much horsepower do you need so that it matches the boat and the performance that you want to get out of it? And later on, more importantly, how is the engine going to align to the shaft and the other components that are already in place? So I've decided on the Beta 43, and I guess my next question is like, how do we get started? How do I start, what's the first step to get this thing installed?
Yeah, so once we've chosen a model and once we figured out, the best fit for your application,
right?
Then we just need to make sure what your engine bed looks like. If you really think of it from a very simplistic standpoint, our engine is really only going to touch your boat in 5 points. You got your shaft coupling, which normally isn't going to change, so that location would be a good reference point. And then you've obviously got the 4 engine mounts that will attach to your stringers. So really, once we know the reference between the shaft coupling and the engine beds, that will give us an idea of, we have a variety of kind of off-the-shelf mounts, and in some cases we can do custom mounts if necessary.
All right, thanks so much, Keith. I appreciate it. I'll get back to you with some of the measurements, and we'll see where to go from there.
Sounds good.
I feel like I spend a good portion of my life with this boat upside down, crammed into tiny spaces. I'm down in the engine hold here, and I'm going to be working on getting the coupler off of the engine shaft. Let me see if I can show you this here. So what we've got here, this is the shaft right here. This is the, let me get a pointer here. All right, what we got here, so take a look. This is the shaft, right? It comes from the stern of the boat, comes up here. This is a coupling, it's on here. Can you see that? It's a coupling. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut this very, very carefully right along here, right where the key is. There's a key that goes inside there, and that's what kind of locks it in place. Well, I'm going to cut down right into the coupling right there at the key so I don't touch the shaft. And once I get close enough, hopefully hit it with a cold chisel, it'll open this thing up. We'll be able to slide it off of the shaft. So why am I doing this? I can't take the measurements I need to take. I can't extrapolate out where the shaft is going to be relative to the engine beds until I get this coupling off of here. Then I'll be able to lay something against the shaft, kind of extrapolate out where it goes. That'll tell me how much has to come off of the engine bed. So before I get anywhere down the road, I've got to get this coupling off. Trust me, I debated trying to use a tool to get this off. I broke my gear puller already trying to pull this off of here. It didn't work. There is a special tool that you use for this. It's called like a flange pulling tool. But I don't have one, and the one they make for marine applications is $150. You got to order it from a shop, and I don't have that. And To be honest with you, the last time I did this type of project, when I was doing some of the work on my classic Allberg 30 sailboat, well, I cut the flange off that shaft also, because from my experience, it's basically, once they get rusted like this, it's virtually almost impossible to get them off of there, no matter how much heat you apply, no matter how much penetrating oil you apply, no matter how much you use a puller and work on them, it can be extremely difficult to get them off and take a lot of time and effort. So I'm going to try and cut it off. And to do that, I've got a handy rotary tool. And this particular one, I'll show you, it's got these special reinforced cutting discs that you use. They're fiberglass reinforced, and hopefully this will work, cutting through here. The key is you got to be very careful not to damage the stainless steel shaft, because this shaft is probably 8 feet long. They're very expensive. It's 1.25 inches in diameter. I'm gonna work on this. We'll see if we can get this off of here. You can see I've laid down, this is this material here is actually a welding blanket to kind of catch the sparks that may come off of this as I'm working here. And I'll just kind of take my time, and we'll see what we can accomplish doing this. We'll know right away whether this is gonna work or not.
If you're doing a boat restoration and your boat has an inboard engine, if you're doing any sort of repower, chances are you're going to end up having to do this sort of project. Sometime you're going to have to get that coupler off. There's a couple things you got to know. The first one might seem kind of obvious. You need to be able to see what you're doing. Often it's really difficult to get inside the engine compartment, get up close, see what's going on. Don't make the mistake of trying to do this at arm's length when you can't see what's happening up close. Second thing is you really got to take your time. You really got to stop and take a moment to check what you're doing before you continue on. You got to be very cautious when you're doing this. Otherwise, you'll end up ruining your shaft and costing yourself a lot of money and headache. On my classic sailboat, I actually damaged the shaft when I was removing the coupler back in the day. I was lucky that it was only about 3 feet long, and it cost me several $100s to get it replaced. You can only imagine what an 8-foot shaft would cost you. Just like any kind of metal work, there's going to be a lot of debris that comes off of this while you're trying to cut it. You've got to have PPE to make sure that you don't take a piece of metal in the eye or up your nose. It might seem tempting. This is not a project for your grinder. The grinder's just too big and it puts off too much sparks and it's just uncontrollable. You really need something like this rotary tool to be able to really control what's going on. Have lots of spare cutting discs available. I think on this project I went through 4 or 5 discs before I finally got everything cut open. Cut only at the keyway, using the key as a sacrificial kind of piece. That way you won't risk cutting down into the shaft.
Oh yeah, it's working. That clanging noise that you're hearing is the flange bearing that is loose right now. And so I'm kind of holding this with one arm to whack this thing off here. But this stupid metal plate back here is banging around, but this is coming off here. Oh yeah! And here we go. It's coming off, see? Look at that. Sweet Mary, I'm loving it. Come on, sweetness. You're coming off. Oh. Come on, you dirty dog. Ah. There it goes. Come on, dirty dog. No damage. I love it. All right. Sweet Mary Buttercup. Look at that. Oh, that was a monster. We started with the little guy, and then went to the bigger guy, and then we said, "Hey, we're going for the John Henry here. We're gonna take care of this bad boy."
Now that the shaft coupler is off the shaft, I'm able to kind of come up with a way to extrapolate out where the shaft might go in relation to the engine bed. I had some scrap plastics and composite materials, and I kind of glued something together that I could take this measurement. The end result is something that kind of looks like this diagram that I sent on to Keith at Beta Marine. So let's remember that the whole point of this is to come up with some very detailed measurements using the end of the shaft as a reference point to where the 4 engine mounts might be located on the engine beds inside the engine room.
Fiberglass stringers, the place where the engine is actually mounted to the hull of the boat. Well, those are too high. They're designed for this other engine. They got to be redesigned in order to fit the new Beta Marine engine. How much do I have to modify them? Well, that all depends on some additional measurements that I've got to make.
The initial measurements reveal some other questions now, such as, will the engine fit inside this kind of tunnel here? The shape of the hull, will the oil pan sump fit inside this space? What about the transmission? Is the transmission going to be able to fit into the contours of the hull here?
The transmission that comes standard with the Beta Marine 43 is what's called a PRM 150. It's a manual transmission. The problem is that it's too big to actually fit inside the contours there of the hull. So I got to choose something different. But that's okay, because if you remember, when we took our trip to the Netherlands and chartered the steel Dutch Trawler for 2 weeks, I really became quite fond of the hydraulic clutch. This particular engine utilized a hydraulic transmission. It was very smooth. It was something I never really thought about, but I'm definitely going to consider when I do the repower on my Albin 27. If you're doing a repower or you're installing a new engine in your boat project, make sure you do some research so you have an idea of what size you need and what features you really want. I'll be able to marry one with the Beta 43. It's called a twin disc Techno Drive TM345. This transmission comes from an Italian company. It's very high quality. Unfortunately, it's also very expensive, but I think it's really going to be a nice feature to have on this engine. And the best part about it is that I think it's going to fit inside the hull contours there. It shouldn't be a problem. Just to be sure, I've got to make another cardboard pattern and mock this thing up. Using an old paper towel tube and some cardboard, I'm able to kind of get an idea of what a cross-section of this transmission would look like at its widest point, make sure that it fits inside the hull cavity here. This is a very rudimentary way of kind of doing this, but I think it looks pretty good. All this work brings us to the final point, which is how is the engine going to be mounted to the engine beds? Do the engine beds need to be modified in any way in order to get a proper angle where the engine meets the shaft and all that? Well, this is a question for another episode. And I also want to discuss this new idea that I had about using some modern technology to try and make my life a little bit easier in my amateur boat building. In a future episode, I'm going to talk about a technique for using the LiDAR scanner inside your iPhone and using that scanned data, importing it into CAD software so you can get a virtual rendering of what, say, an engine might look like inside your engine bed. How do you actually do it? What's the software you use? What are the steps that you actually have to go through to make this happen? We'll talk about all that in a future episode. In the meantime, check out some of my episodes where I travel the world talking to interesting people and looking at interesting boats. Trust me, you're gonna love it. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you next time. Stay motivated.